Okay, this tutorial will be about drawing some kind of shirt on our portrait. I'm starting out with kind of this basic reference, and I've got some others on this page that you can look at for different styles of neckline. So I say I'll use this one, but I'm going to modify it a little bit, and you guys should also modify it depending on what you want your portrait to look like. First thing that you want to notice is that the fabric wraps around the neck. The neck is like a cylinder, like we've talked about before, and so it's going to wrap around it. If I were doing my portrait exactly modeled on this, I would probably start this neckline around here. I'm going to do mine a little lower since I've given my person a collarbone. All right, so I'm going to start out. Okay, we're going to start out and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing a little better. And I'm going to do the inner part of the opening. So right here. So I'm kind of making a little mark as if I'm going up and over at the skin. And then again, I'll make my t-shirt come down a little bit lower. So if this is where the skin is, I'm going up and over like so. All right, so notice that there's kind of a little loop shape there. All right, now I can make another kind of little line there. And I'll make this kind of little lip almost of the fabric. And I'm just going to keep this light. I'll just be close to that original line. So see how I leave little curves here? So it looks like the fabric is curving, and I would probably keep that a little bit closer to my original line than I had it. All right, now I'm going to make this look like it's kind of extending down, something like that. So if this were up here on the neck, it would have a little bit more of an angle to it. So just angling with the shoulder, and it's a little bit above where my shoulder line would be. And then I can just, again, kind of follow that, and you might have a little bit of sort of a dip and rise. Here you can even see the line of the seam a little bit. So if I were to do that, I could kind of draw this in, and you would see the line of the seam there a little. And we'll zoom out a little bit so you can see. All right, so I'm just following this, making this little dip and following it out and kind of maybe flaring out a little bit. So looking at this line. Oh, and one thing in here I forgot is that maybe about here, again, I can put that little rise and fall of where the seam might show in the shirt. Oops. So I can put that in there and have that line. And notice this line is kind of rippling a little bit in and out with some different wrinkles. So I can have that kind of rippling in and out. All right. And you could even draw in lightly some of these wrinkles. Don't want to have these be too even or it'll look odd. So I'm drawing in some little lines there, and then we're going to shade those in a little bit. All right, then on the other side of the body, similar kind of idea. So again, I can have this kind of dip down a little bit. And we can have some light wrinkles here. So something like that. So as you're shading this, wherever this falls, if it's up higher on the neck, say up here, or it's down a little lower, we're going to have a little bit of a shadow coming from underneath that fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in. And if you can see that wrapping around here, you might even get a little bit of a shadow where you can kind of see underneath it. So I would have that there. And I'm just going to switch to my slightly darker 2B pencil. Okay, so I start out with what might look like a line, but then I'm going to just add my shading right up from that line. So, and we're just getting lighter as we go. So, and to taper that out, I'm creating a kind of an uneven ending here if I want to cross hatch a little bit. Because I don't want this to look like just a really thick outline here. I want this to look like a shadow that's starting a little bit darker and then getting a little lighter. And I've got my blending tool that I folded earlier. So again, you want to fold that, not roll. So, and I'm just blending to this side of the line. I'm not skipping over it. I'm not doing it all on this side. I'm just doing this side. Try to get my hand out of the way so you can see. And even though this doesn't have a ton of detail, we don't want to go, we don't want to rush too much. We want to make sure that this part also looks good so we don't ruin the illusion. If you've got a little bit of extra skin in between here like I do, I want to make sure I sort of connect those like shadowed areas there. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. I would now continue that shading. I'm going to do over here on the shoulder. We don't want to make these lines that we did too dark. So I'm probably going to lighten all of these up as I go. All right, so starting over here, I'll make these lines a little lighter. And I'm just going to notice where some of these shadows are falling and where they're sort of soft edges. So I'm kind of keeping those edges soft. I don't need those to be really hard edges. And coming down here. Maybe something like that. And then down here, as we're getting closer to the armpit, a little more shading. And we also are going to kind of basically shade coming in from this shoulder a little bit to make this form feel rounded. So if these edges are too dark, you can lighten them up a little bit. I also have a little bit of sketchiness around here I'm going to get rid of a little. So we don't want these to have really hard edges, or I'm sorry, we don't want these to have really dark edges that stand out too much. At the edge though of the shirt, this can be crisp, however. So I do want a definitive edge here at the edge of the body. And I can shade in a little bit from that edge of the body to give this a rounded look. And I can shade a little bit along these lines where I have these different seams here. Again, just the fabric making little forms, curves, little shadows. So just making sure this edge stays crisp without having a really dark outline. And continuing that idea in these other areas. And I don't necessarily have to have, I'm going to actually taper out some of this shadow a little bit. I don't have to have a really strong line all around here, all along the neck. So I'm just lightening that up a little bit, and I might use a little bit more shading in some areas than others. And I don't want this to be too sketchy. Another way I can do this is by making sure that I have kind of a darker, already dirty blending tool, and I can use that to kind of help me add a little bit to this as well. This edge here doesn't have to be quite as precise because it's not along the edge of the body. So just adding a little bit of shading to this so it doesn't look flat. And if it ends up a little too blendy, you can just go back in and add a little bit more crispness. And we'll do a similar kind of thing over here. I'm also noticing here as I'm panning across, there's like some slight wrinkles and shadows going on along here, probably at the collarbones. You could add that a little bit in here too. Okay, and again, just a little bit of shading here along the edge of the form. So if it's a little too dark here at the edge, I can just lighten it up. So just lightening up this part right here so that we don't have an outline that sticks out too much. And just continuing to shade lightly. Again, you do want to have a solid edge here. You just don't want that outline to stick out more than the rest of the shading. So you're shading from that edge down into the form. Over here along these shadows, these, however, you want softer edges. And if any of these come out so that they're looking a little odd, you're probably just going a little too dark, and you can just lighten them up. All right, so coming back in here again with the blending tool, again, making sure that you keep these as firm edges. So if I accidentally go over that edge, I would just go back in and erase and make it a little more solid with my pencil as well if I need to. So even though there's not as much detail in here, you still want to make sure that it looks well crafted, otherwise it will distract from the work that you did on the face. So if it's not blending well together using your lightest pencil, try a 2B pencil, still shading lightly, but that will blend a little bit more easily. All right, so I think that just about does it for the shirt. You can do any kind of clothing you want on your figure using whatever reference you want. But those basic ideas of the cloth actually having a form, wrapping around the body, using some shading at the edges in order to make those kind of curve back and the rest of the form pop out, looking to see if there are wrinkles anywhere in the fabric that'll make it look more like fabric. Let's see over here. I think some of these edges are just sticking out a little too much. So again, just lightening those up. So whatever kind of style you want, where the fabric touches the skin, having a shadow cast on the skin. So if I wanted to do tank tops, for example, a tank top, I could have, done the end of the fabric here, but it would have had to rise above the skin and curve around it and then shade onto the skin. And if I had the bare arms, I would shade at the edge of the skin to make it pop out and look like it's curving like I did in other places. All right, that is the end of this tutorial.